It's my great pleasure to introduce you to our next speakers. Phil Harris and Adrian Welke of Troppo architects studied architecture in Adelaide, but in the late 1970s they ditched the southern city in favour of a journey around Australia in a combi van. They ended up in Australia's tropical north, where they were fascinated by the vernacular buildings they found there. Since then, they've become fierce advocates of creating architecture with a strong sense of place that responds to its climate and its local setting. They've designed homes, cultural buildings and urban schemes, and Troppo architects, it says on their website, are now the third most awarded architectural practice in Australia. Phil and Adrian were the joint recipients of the Australian Institute of Architects Gold Medal last year, and it's a really great pleasure to welcome them here today.
Thanks, Jeremy, for your introduction and looking after us while we're here and keeping us sober. To the New Zealand Institute of Architects for inviting us to present here today. It's indeed a privilege. Not my first trip here, neither Phil's. I think Phil went skiing. Mine was a bit more cerebral than Phil's. It's probably quite appropriate. This is part of a series of lectures that we've been given as an obligation for receiving the gold medal, which was required to us to travel to each of the states in Australia. I think New Zealand's the 7th state of Australia so far. So we're here to do it. And then we sign off. The gold medal, the new gold medalist will be announced next month in Australia. On the gold medal, I was interested to hear from John and Sheila that it was a complete surprise that when they were notified that they got the gold medal, because that's not the same process in Australia. We knew that we were being nominated. In fact, we were obligated to put in a submission to put our case. I think the amazing bit was that they wanted to give it to us because Tropo and the Institute of Architects have had a relationship with a rather vexed history. And it goes right back to when we first graduated. We moved to Darwin, as has been mentioned, and not yet 12 months out of university, we decided not only to get registered, but to set up our own practice. And after a fairly long evening on a veranda with a few beers, we decided we were going to call it Troppo, and Julie went away and registered the business name Troppo Architects, only for a very quick reaction from the Institute of Architects senior membership that for some reason they thought that we were bringing the profession into disrepute and tried to get us knocked off. So our response was, we'll head off to birth, deaths and marriages. I'm gone dead. Hello, am I here? Back on? Yeah. We'll go off and re-register our names as Phil Troppo and Adrian Troppo, and then we could be legitimately Troppo architects and they couldn't knock us off. In between time, though, the file was actually given to a girl in Crown Law who they didn't know was actually sharing the house that we were living in. So we had a bit of inside information that there was no grounds under the Act to get us knocked off, so we didn't get our names changed, much to our mum's delight. And we remain Phil Harris and Adrian Welke. We'll have a scripted duet in good Irish tradition, as Sheila and John presented. Ours will be less that beautiful Irish accent. And the title for our talk is Troppo's 35 Years of Going Backwards.
Oh, geez, I knew I shouldn't have gone online last night. It's not safe in this country. Oh, there we go. Yep, well, we're two, but we represent many. Our practice has existed in 5 locations, and it has 5 directors and 21 keen young architects and graduates. But we wouldn't be what we are, that's the list of them, but we wouldn't be what we are without learning and stealing from our friends, right back in the beginning of our learning at the University of Adelaide. Yes, we had studios in which you could smoke, pipes even, and draft in the most relaxed fashion. And we knew how to take time out to build our team ways. This is the mighty second years, victors in the Rolf Jensen Memorial Sporting Trophy in 1975. We'd even holiday together, dangerously. You won't know these people, but I left the slide in for the hairstyles. Anyway, after studenthood, we'd still catch up overseas on study tours together, and after a few drinks, these guys would take on anything, moving or otherwise. So to deliver ourselves from these South Australian maniacs and to practice with any sanity, we would need to find some decent guides. First we searched in Queensland, but Russell Hall and Gabrielle Poole weren't able to help us. In New South Wales we did find some good guides in Glenn and Paul Faleros, but they were downright worried for us, right from when as Troppo we won our first gong. So they sat us down and explained things. That's Paul there again, teaching. They cooked for us, Paul, Peter Stutchbury, Rick Lapastria. They scared crocodiles away from our families on their therapy tours up north. They even helped us on all-nighters. That's Stutch on the right there again, in particular a great team player, Stutch. Yes, we would not be as warped as we are if it weren't for all of these friends. Anyhow, traditionally Australians have been in the habit of spinning a yarn, and this one will cover some 600,000 kilometres of driving, nigh on 3,000 projects, and 37 going on 38 years, hopefully easily within the allocated hour. And our story, like all yarns, has a beginning.
As architecture students from Australia's temperate south, where cities had been shaped by the British tradition, where we're led to believe that the Australian history of architecture turned on the evolution of early Victorian to middle and late Victorian and then to Edwardian styles, always with Georgian and neoclassical hanging around. And of course, bravo, da-da-da-da, long live the international style. A history told from a perspective fixed in a temperate and urban experience. The notion of Australian architectures that responded to the diverse Australian environments, resources, and our own Aboriginal heritage did not find its way into our curriculum. But we did learn about building science, to calculate sun angles, and to learn about building science and properties of materials. In a break-in study in 1977, Phil and I and two mates, Justin Hill and James Hayter, decided to investigate beyond the urban realm, beyond Australia's recorded architectural history. We were encouraged by Max Freeland's words. A country's architecture is a near perfect record of its history. Every building captures in physical form and climate and resources of a country's geography and the conditions of its society. Every building explains the time and the place in which it was built. So we set off in a combi van on a clockwise course around Oz. And indeed we found a great diversity of approach to shelter making. A diversity that spoke of place, of climate and natural resources, and of the settlers' own creative response to their environment.
They were not driven by style, and nowhere did this response produce more abstract, weird and wonderful buildings than in the tropical north. You could live in, around, and even under the thing known as a house. And the vaguer the division of space within, the more it seemed to fit the needs of climate and the fluctuating numbers of people moving through. Not only was there little division within, but there was also little division to the outside world. On a shelter number line, buildings up north seemed to fit somewhere down toward the end, occupied by a tree. We wrote about these things in, believe it or not, the first history of Australia's own architecture, influences in regional architecture. After completing studying in '79, Adrian and I headed back north to Darwin, population 50,000, on the edge of the Arafura Sea. Next stop, Indonesia, and over 3,000 kilometres to another Australian city.
Its whitefella history runs a little bit like this. At first the town was built from what was locally available, split woven bamboo, local cypress, and also from the lightest materials that could be brought by ship or on camelback, usually canvas and corrugated iron. This little nest was for Qantas pilots and hosties en route to London. In 1911, the territory came under Commonwealth control, and senior public servants were granted one of these, the first of a series of proudly North Australian houses, houses that breathe in the close tropical air. In time, timber slats gave way to flywire and louvers, and generally more industrialised wall and window systems. World War II brought devastation from Japanese bombing raids. But the city regrouped. The tropical house was reborn, albeit in a more austere aesthetic. But it carried over from the basics of simple planning, elevated construction, easily transportable lightweight materials, and fully openable walls. Then on Christmas Eve 1974, Cyclone Tracy flattened the place.
And the rebirth wasn't so breathe easy. Lessons from the past seemed lost, and that's where we stepped in.
Armed with a government grant to study the history of tropical housing, 2 bikes and 2 deck chairs, we took up the opportunity to set up practice. And we started with a manifesto, punkers and pith helmets, good principles of tropical house design. It included the ABCD of how to passively design to achieve comfort in the tropics. A, orientate buildings for prevailing breezes and detail for cross-ventilation. B, allow for the escape of rising heat. C, build lightweight so the day's heat can be given up at night. And D, shelter walls and openings. Working at unbelievably cheap rates for unbelievably brave clients in a young city on the edge of an ancient yet surviving lands, we created a swag of simple but fun, new but old houses.
And we'll start with the green can, which was named after Darwin's favourite beer, which reminds me I'm a bit thirsty, Adrian.
Cheers.
Jeez.
Catch up on your slide.
I'll move the laptop out the way.
Got to go one.
Got to go one more?
That was one.
There we go. And although it only came fourth, did I get that bit to explain that we've actually got a green beer here, but it's not quite the same beautiful emerald colour that the VB is, actually. But it'll do. And I also notice it's an import. What is the thing? Why are we not drinking New Zealand beer here? Anyway, although it only came fourth in the government's low-cost housing competition, being defeated by such boxes as the Modulaire and the Banksia, that may be the Banksia on the bottom there, the green can soon became infamous. It divided opinion, creating fury on talkback radio for its overt connection with the outdoors and its veranda boards that had come inside, not to mention its ability to catch cobwebs. The Australian newspaper picked up the story and, slighting the top prize winners, ran with "Darwin stakes its housing future on green can." The program for the house was simple. A mostly timber portal frame structure enabled spaces to be divided at need, and wet areas were grouped in a service zone. The manifesto had been followed to the letter.
As cheap as the green can was, down in Coconut Grove, in a new subdivision that was to become known as Tropoville, we were going cheaper. 8 punters, a couple of builders and lots of neighbour labour made it all happen. We started with our own house, eventually to become Phil and Annie's. We bought it in exchange for a model of a new project, placed it on its 3rd site, pulled it apart and with friends put it back together again with bits stolen from elsewhere. And then there were 2 orders for green cans, both elevated. And then still on a roll with roofs, literally, and getting braver at making broad openings from off-the-shelf doors. And here, trying our hand at a slatted house, 1986 style. Bernard Carr's house had a grand entry, but inside it was really just a shed.
Marcus's house was the cheapest, and this is the view from the front door. But its small footprint was lofty enough to yield a mezzanine and so fit a young family within its roomless volume. The split woven bamboo gables were imported from Indonesia in a neighbour's yacht, and shutters and other fitments were owner built. Community-based delivery got our projects over the line back then.
Another early house, this time on Darwin's Fringe. Mr. Phillips, the owner, was a roofer, and his mates in other trades joined him to build this pavilion house. Do-it-yourself timber louvers, single-skin corrugated iron, and not much more make up this easy-breathing rural home. You might call his house a shack, and we proudly would. And others, all with simple volumes and few partitions, even over 3 levels. And also further afield, a bush school for Aboriginal outstation in Arnhem Land, with a teacher in the penthouse. It's all shut us down for walkabout times. These examples up until 1982 were only but a few of 150 projects. We'd acquired cars and mortgages, partners and children. Time for a review. What have we discovered from all this work? By what principles we might continue to practice without losing our way in this material world?
Well, let's try the theory of the 10th line. This may better explain Saul's work, by the way, so I'm not sure if he's still here, but I'll send him the talk afterwards. Anyway, take a drawing of a cube. You'll notice it has 9 lines. It seems solid, an object with contained inner space. It tends to lead to architecture like this, and yes, for cred, we're using an Italian Travels pic, but the theory was indeed invented in a bar in Rome. Anyway, so now we draw the 10th line, and we need draw no more, for the object's already exploded. It's now a frame, outside and inside merged. Armed with this thinking, let's look again at the way we go about making architecture. Let's consider design from 4 angles.
First, let's consider things accommodationally. 9th line adherents think of rooms, each being thought to occupy a specific defined activity. However, 10th line theory leads one to merge space, to add just the least divisions, and even then, only at certain times. This sort of space is a lot more adaptable, and in a house, it can respond to people's strange and wonderful, not easily categorisable activities, like kids playing en masse, incredible projects, and studies on the go, Christmas lunch, partying.
Then let's think contextually. The 9-line cube sits rather dissociated from its environment. It speaks of disinterest in place. Let's shift our thinking beyond the build object to the space around and perhaps between buildings. Consider, for example, the role that functional landscape might play, shade and cooling paths for breezes, or as a windbreak, creating privacy, a path for water flow. Oh, jeez, but he's done it again. Cute little bugger, the old possum, isn't it? Anyway, damn computers, let's go back there. What's going on? Anyway, now we might really sense place. Now we're face to face with environment, with it literally. And to maximise the opportunity, we need a dynamic architectural response, an architecture of adjustable skins, connecting indoors and out. An architecture that responds to the morning, the evening, the season, the moment that is.
And then through the technical filter. These days, comfort is at one's fingertips. All you need is a switch. Of course, 9th line answer doesn't sit well with the reducing of the production of greenhouse gases. We reckon there's also little prompt to create interesting buildings. In the tropics, an architecture built around the theory of the 10th line will incorporate devices to deliver on the ABCDs. We get louvers, shutters, slatted screens, big eaves, sunshades, and up above myriad vents. Inside, fans are whirring and punkers are flapping.
Fun added to architecture for free. Fourthly, thinking materially, forget architecture for effect, forget grandiose decorated cubes, all with masses of material. 10th line thinking strips away what we don't need and makes us question just how much to add to a frame for shelter and function. Simply put, less is more. Less building to maintain, more resources left in the ground, more trees left photosynthesising. Next then, a couple of houses built post-10th line in 1984.
Little house, big roof. Here, shown nearing the end of construction with only DIY timber louvers to add, was built to our material takeoffs under fixed priced labour contracts, $30,000 in 1984. All the structure remains on show. In the end, the garden becomes part of the bathroom journey and the visual screen.
And this one, in a wealthier suburb, is largely built of jarrah. To the street, the jarrah appears as weatherboards, as louvers, as a slatted screen, providing privacy but also ventilation. And there is a certain magic in its play of light, both by day and by night. and we call this architecture by accident.
Then there was the Troppo Type 5 from a second affordable housing competition. Yes, unbelievably, after the public hammering we got over the green can, we backed up for more and won, and even got it built. A few times. Its superstructure is steel. Its floor plan is square, yet detailed still to be penetrable by breezes. Verandas come inside, adding a sense of spaciousness, and kids can mess up all year round.
Bawali, a landscape interpretation centre in Kakadu National Park, was designed with Glenn Murcutt in 1992. The building's textures are testimony to the involvement of local Aboriginal people who source materials from their land, and the involvement of the interpretive designer, a fellow who by now is a real mate, David Lancashire from Melbourne. The building has no front door. It is approached as one enters a rock art site, obliquely, with extended opportunity to announce, to sing your presence, to be seen, cautious, respectful. The entry deck floats above the falling ground, and thereon sits a rock, the reception desk. Local eucalypt screens temper the glare of the day. Water cascades down building faces and a huge central roof gutter, like wet season rains off the nearby Arnhem Land escarpment. Man-made billabongs come inside too, to interplay with the rain. The building tells stories of the land, is of the land, and one day will return to it. In Wick country, way up Queensland's Cape York, coexist three communities and Weipa, a town base for Rio Tinto's bauxite mine. This project, Archimbun West Cape Cultural Centre, involved all in an exercise in building reconciliation. It recycles the mine's old stubby hut, the mine's first social club in fact, but is now adorned with forms reminiscent of canoes and sails and fishing spears, and this is it on opening day, and that's bauxite mud for render. The $150,000 budget meant we had to make good use of the mine's tip and Napranum Community's bush mill, and again, Mr Lancashire's help. Yet we managed, and with some spare structure for future add-ons.
Meanwhile, back in Darwin at East Point Reserve, the site of a historic World War II corrugated iron camp, the Darwin City Council asked us to provide a restaurant and function centre. And so here, Peewees slots into the monsoon forest setting, emerging out to a sea view, all with a grandeur of its own. It's upmarket, yet has plywood floors and operates without air conditioning.
On another tack, we created our version of a Bali compound house, a house that blurs inside and outside space. The gate is actually the front door, a bit of recycled Indonesian fishing boat. A bathroom missing a wall sits just the other side. A colonnaded outdoor spine feeds living and bedrooms, each with its own special site corner. The colonnade also organises roof water that falls to cooling ponds. At the end of the journey, the dining room is a mere veranda.
The Rosac House, built in 2001, is an autonomous house located 60 kilometres south of Darwin, somewhere between a rock and a hard place. The platform ensures for cooling breezes for all elements of the house. Materials are lightweight, just enough to do the job. Water is harvested, solar power is generated, and waste is treated. The structure is stretched to its limit. The view of Darwin's furious lightning storms is awesome. Its energy rating, however, is 0 stars. But without another hour to talk about that, that's another story.
In 2003, Greg McNamara and Lenny Yarley became NT directors of the practice. And their work has inspired the whole practice to new levels of environmental and community accountability. This is Arafura, a medium density development, the result of an NT government competition. The process of entry is immediately cooling. Open plan, broadly opening living overlays with the demand for cross ventilation. Roof and ceiling form and detail promotes escape of rising heat. And in 2011, a start-up house for a young family in the 5-acre carve-up of Darwin's savanna surrounds. Palladio, eat your heart out, for here a central veranda corridor joins bush with bush, collecting a kitchen and a pool along the way. Pavilions generally open are shuttered for holiday escapes. Roofs are again devised and detailed for escape of rising heat. All is lightweight, and the high shutters are operated by rope. In Darwin, we live with fire, for here it is our friend. And as dastardly as it looks, from fire, new life quickly emerges. The ecosystem refreshes. Greg and Lena, partners in life, together left their cherished earth too early. But through their brilliant work and our renewed energy, they live on.
Back during the early 90s, we opened a second practice in North Queensland, in Townsville, a place where the outback squeezes through a break in the Great Dividing Range. Jeff Clark became director there in '96. Here a house was traditionally built of exposed timber wall frames. This is Jeff's new age answer, overlaid with galvanised iron and low-cost polycarbonate shutters. And this smaller than it looks Kuranda house resurrects the disappearing lineage of the tropical shack. Humble materials, but broad openings. Again, polycarbonate shutters and a casement window for old time's sake. This more recent house is on Townsville's Magnetic Island. Its design was led by Zami Rahan. Here, all materials have to be arrived by ferry. Steel portal frames reduce overall material content and enable broad openings. The room filled with plywood, fold-away doors and timber louvers. All fun to move through whilst connecting with the site in different ways. Townsville is also a defence town. Here, in association with BVN,
And geez, don't they get around?
in a TEAS construction management contract, we produced 1,000 accommodation units and 3 mess complexes for the Australian Army. The project is for blokes whose initiation requires them to stopping a ceiling fan with their head. It's actually and visually tough, with more in common with a tank than a bistro or residence. But beneath that toughness are the usual ABCD principles for achieving comfort in the tropics without air conditioning. It was a 2002 Robin Boyd winner for residential architecture.
Back in 2001, we began work on Thursday Island in the Torres Strait, just below PNG, on Gabtatui, the Torres Strait Cultural Centre. Grafting onto a 1950s government issue house with a structure reminiscent of the Strait's amazing praying mantis-like outrigger canoes and that mob's crazy headgear, not to mention the spiky cray and gaping shark jaws. But we only got as far as concept design. With government tendering procedures, which Australia is rapidly becoming famous for, that's as far as our involvement went. Not too happy about the finished product, so we're only showing you the model. The self-funded islanders on the more remote Musig Island were more intelligent, and we stayed on there to detail down to the bolt. Here, while on business, visiting islanders and outsiders need a place to stay and base. That's a bit of the old lodge on the right, and then there's our additions, which are more vigorously spread island love in the foreground. It's glass-free, in a garden setting that accompanies movement. And timber framing creates lofty spaces and fly screen walls ventilate up high. Now, 2004, slipping down the Pacific to Byron Bay, New South Wales. Bay Street is shops down and apartment stores up, behind the surf club in the Byron core. Veranda action on 2 levels and all for breeze, even the basement car park is naturally ventilated. Affordable fun and on the front row, indeed. Surf's up.
These days, along with the odd trip north, Phil and I both practice down south, and the 10th line still drives us to enjoy the day that is.
And I'm in temperate, very pleasant Adelaide, with plenty of gentle valleys in which to gather olives and grapes, to bring back to a city firmly occupying its firmly organised grid. Oh, and the home of Trevor Chappell. On you, Trev. That's the way to build relationships between countries. Anyway, so we've practiced on small house additions where usually a heavy masonry Adelaide house offers ready thermal ballast to a lightweight northern sun catcher, of course shaded for summer and with high-level venting for cooler summer evenings. In this one, much more recently, and we weren't responsible for the green mood lighting, by the way, young Tane Patterson, in fact, has grafted onto another old red bricker, this time with the warmth of raw steel and spotted gum. Again, finding and controlling north with a timbery backyard transition. And in conservative North Adelaide, we've carved 2 levels from 1 in a small villa on a 6 metre wide site, recycling all bounding walls. And again, an addition as a new solar collector and with least new material. There's a mezzanine bedroom and a pool on the entry axis. Also off that axis is squeezed a bathroom and laundry into the 900mm wide side yard space. But really, it's all about opening to that cherished, if skinny, backyard. And still in North Adelaide on the parkland edge, city views may be south, but the peace and the sun remain north. Ponds and ground covers blend with a paved courtyard as the real focus for a quiet couple with grandchildren on the rise. Rammed earth, Australian hardwoods, dynamic shading systems, Power is offset, water is stored in the basement and stormwater managed on site. It's all about green urban living at the top end of town. Actually, came to be known as the Chook House, by the way. But here in a leafy foothill suburb, we've recycled something else. This time it's a 60s house slab that spanned a creek. And Creekside becomes a focus for a northern court. Great resources with which to create a house of broadly opening spaces. And again, serious water harvesting in this, the drier state. And still architecture by accident as night falls. And for this project, back to North Adelaide, we have glassy parklands face and a rear lane address as well. Front to back, the house opens up to create private courtyards and decks with a view, all with measured privacy. A lap pool, outdoor showers, dynamic shading systems to the north and a secreted rooftop above. A house of many spaces, many outlooks, retreat or being out there at choice. And still architecture by accident.
Chonglu, a locally famous chef's little job, a pop-up thinking loft in an inner suburban Unley. Got to love that decent Federation roof pitch and the lovely yellow blind to sunshade.
But we've been cocking up the roofline of heritage buildings all over the place. Even in Kew, in an inner Melbourne suburb, there's another light-catching thinking loft, Studley Park Road, 1999. Too damn dark, those old Victorian houses. Victorian houses, in fact. Too unrelated to their backyards. And as a result of this great work, we've never got another Melbourne residential job.
And in the Adelaide Hills, we do love little things rural, where we can dig in to devise systems and shop drawings for owner building. And humble ones, like this house high on the Barossa Ridge by Kerry Duffield, who thankfully now largely runs the Tropo enterprise. It's orientated for sun and view that makes for a sense of luxury, without gold doorknobs and hundreds of square metres.
And we also love little things at the beach. Here on the wild south coast, it's hard to shelter from an insistent summer sou'easter and the stormy winter sou'wester. Sea-facing verandas tend to be a joke, as was the case with this rather twee beach house. That's a pre-existing beach house. That's the fat white bit, which was bought by my doubles partner. So this is Dave and Robin's sideways veranda. Each step around the western side of that old white shack revealed a huge drop in wind force. So we put it there, sideways. And with some blinds and slats and roof lifting to the north and the hills, we have a much enjoyed venue in which to kick back and get it all year. And yep, we'll even go to rural Victoria, in this case Horsham, for a veranda job. This rather grand string of verandas almost wraps Gaza and Shaz's rather white abode right on the Wimmera River. It's high enough not to interfere with the house's solar access. The form-ply laser-cut ceiling is inspired by looking upward through the ukes of the riverside site. Gaz and Shaz, and I reckon the whole of Horsham likes to party, so this project is all about venue. Some happy reflective magic in the redecked pool. But back to South Australia. This Kangaroo Island retreat interplays with a perched site, its prospect and landform, and there are musings of a sea eagle dreaming. The wings of a fractured plan create spaces to shelter outdoor dining spaces, irrespective of the wind direction. There's decks east, west and north, and courts between and behind. Rammed earth from the site offers thermal balance to north-facing glass. Australian hardwoods and cypress pine are left to grey off, ageing gracefully to the hues of the site. Inside and outside bathrooms include materials from the stony beach. Another Kangaroo Island house is above an estuary breeding ground of South Australia's favourite fish, the King George whiting, best simply pan-fried with a squeeze of lemon, a little garnish of parsley. The building's shifting forms, here we're still in construction, swish and sway their way out to sea. Movement between all spaces is by a zigzagging sea creature-y veranda on the leeward edge. You can't help but get involved with the wallabies. A Xantheria-fitting fish of a building. And happy fishers are happy eaters. And there's another recently finished KI one, but you'll have to wait till we can afford the photography for any more on that. But while we've still got fish on the mind, let's go to Melbourne Zoo and an interpretive space known as the Wild Sea. Troppo, TCL, your waterfront landscape architects here, and our mate David Lancashire again. Nothing like a zoo project to set the mind spinning about the world we're all captive in. It's a $20 million theatre set for urban seals and penguins, who we understand have never been happier. It's also a device for learning of the environmental stories of the Victorian coast. We hope you get that seasidey feeling, because even the keepers feel they're at the beach.
And I'm in Perth, or rather Fremantle, facing the Indian Ocean, with a whole 3,000 kilometres of state by length sitting above me and 2,000 kilometres west of Phil. And I've got a shed.
There it is.
To live in and to work from, and for my boys to add their pads onto. But actually, 600 kilometres east at Esperance has been my family home for most of my
Adrian.
life.
I've done it again.
Thank you.
There we are.
Here I've given back to the old town with a humble tourist venture, Esperance Seaside Apartments. I've got to say, I was hugely concerning when the local press labelled them a ghetto. Well, I was investing in them myself, they had to be cheap. At least it's a bright, fun, seaside-feeling ghetto. Now we're back in Fremantle, in Lois Lane. 3 townhouses that stagger down a deep block. Here, glass, steel, balances with rammed earth, honest expressions of base structure, nestling in the rise and fall of the ancient dune. And of course, the main rooms are the courtyards. Each enables access to encircling internal spaces for our winter friend, the northern sun, and for our summer saviour, the ocean breeze known as the Fremantle Doctor. Polished concrete, softening plywood, and custom orb ceilings carry a feeling or a sense of the outdoors indoors. And here on the Swan River, a lightweight pelican-like palace seems to have ruffled local feathers. For of course here, wealth should be shown much more ostentatiously, through something more materially massive, more profusely decorated. Steel and damper-on eaves and awnings fringe the house for shade, and a bit of reflective magic by night. And this house is in Broom's fancy new suburbs, a world where lightweight construction is still the norm. But it's not the usual place for the good old Broom windscoop, aided here in its effectiveness by elevated construction. There's ridge fence to every space and views pool from deep in the house to Roebuck Bay beyond. The house is just not high enough though for the boat. Now down to Cable Beach, a house of semi-independent living pavilions. Low set, but plenty of drawing power to remove heat. Pavilions are teased apart to accommodate the cooling effect of the landscape. But you'll have to wait for that bit for now. Going back 20 years in time, on the Boali rammed earth workers' 4,800 kilometre journey back home to south of Perth, they dropped into the Kimberley, to Kununurra, to knock up a house for a couple of lost Parisian patissiers. This is Tom and Dom's house, where rammed earth walls are secreted internally within a long cross-ventilating plan form. To meet the rammed earth guys' travel program, Phil knocked up the working drawings over a long weekend. More recently, through the University of West Australia, we've worked with the Department of Housing in hot, arid Kalgoorlie to deliver this pair of prototype rammed earth houses for remote communities. One house has rammed earth walls with insulation and the other is built without it. All part of a monitoring program to assess contemporary role of solar passive design in dry, hot climates with bloody freezing cold mornings.
On Victoria's very different southern ocean coast, in a cool temperate rainforest, there's this small retreat. It locks up with a drawbridge, and I always want to do one of them, and which when down is a deck. Actually, it's an illegal structure. All elements are walked into the site from the nearest road 2 kilometres away, so they're very lightweight. The skin, laid to lighter steel roof and walls, is a heat-reflective twin-wall polycarbonate. Floors are plywood. It's more a bower than a house.
At the other end of existence, for a long time, we've been devising systems for remote communities, usually for Aboriginal communities.
And these places definitely are not towns. They're without the economy or resources of a town. In most ways, they are hopeless places. The result, over 200 years, of a series of failed government control programs over Aboriginal people. Here, people kind of remain in country, but usually not the right country exactly, and with no means of accommodating ageing and growing populations, nor the wildly variable visitation by the amazingly extended families that are the mobs, the nations, that still make up Aboriginal Australia. Even when funded, the provision of housing and infrastructure in these places is very problematic.
But in Central Australia, a favourite system incorporates portable building modules, fabricated in the yard in Alice Springs and trucked to site to minimise construction disruption to communities. Modules are totally pre-finished and internally serviced. In remote communities, reduced site time means reduced costs. And modules come together in interesting ways, and durable packaged plant plugs on. These structures have created robust clinics, staff houses, schools, art centres, and occasionally achieving quite complex aggregations, as in this, the aged care facility at Ernabella on the Ananul Pitjantjatjara Yunkanjatjara lands in northwest South Australia, 500 kilometres from Alice Springs. And now in our 15th year and working on the APY, we're finally getting down to really little things that might make a really big difference to the health in overcrowded houses, which is sadly still the norm out there. This is a plug-in bathroom project. It was developed with our great friend Paul Followers of Health Habitat. The bathroom module is built tough using the same but always improving system, and is delivered in the same portable way. Here it is being eased onto site, old house in the background, and voila. Next task will be rolling out the kitchen project. Here it is in prototype form, again a project with Paul and in industrial design at Christian Teats.
And across the Kimberley, Top End and Cape York, we've constructed houses in many Indigenous communities and outstations. Here, Galawinku on your right. On the left is Kakadu, where personalised dwellings were delivered for each traditional owner. And that's Johnny Muck Muck down the bottom there in front of the really big one that's still under construction. And in them, like up the top there, there's a dream kitchen, which is kind of can cope with making something out of a whole kangaroo. And here we're more westerly, and this time working within a government program, in this case the Western Australian government. And these little dots are Donny Woolagudge's Cone Bay Outstation on the idyllic Kimberley coast. And the thought of idyllic shifts one to think tourism, perhaps even to a Kakadu resort of the local Jabiluka Association. These are love tents, where Jungle Jim goes to Bali with maximum cooling. And there's complimentary cooking shelters, and very recently we've just extended it. This time using lessons learned in the API to control cost and finish off-site, built out of Horsham by friends of Gazzers and Shazzers even. And here we are, introducing to the world our new patented process of gutter circumcision. I can send details around later, anyone who wants to contact me. All done, and it's now settling in with shade, courtesy of retractable reeds on wires and a landscape created by Jabiluku's own team.
And now touring to the northwestern West Australia, to the Kimberley. First we'll stop at the Kununurra's Pump House, a state heritage listed shed, and there should be more of them. Here we've stretched the steel and tin theme to add a sunset drinking space. Tom and Dom as clients again, and a record cheap fit out that even won a Heritage Award, probably because we did so little. And next, winding into the wild Kimberley Ranges.
We'll ritz it up, but keep it real at $3,000 a night at the homestead El Questro. And our project's the three little guys on your far right. It's veranda living on the gorge. Safely behind Kimberley stone, raw steel and bush stick walls. And at these rates, quality privacy is important. And like a gorge, the walls afford water. And there are other ways to get wet in style. If outdoors is too edgy, then it's still rather environmentally connecting inside. All timbers are proudly Australian, and there's hardly a wall that doesn't slide or hinge open. That's the cleaner's cupboard there, in the steel thing, hiding right next to the sliding screen of a front door. But really, with a landscape like that at LQ, stone country, running falling water and shade trees, who needs architecture? Is shelter simply about balancing retreat from and engaging with the environment on your terms?
We started in the city and we'll end there. This is a theory of the 38th line. Yep, it's a theory of the 9th line expanded. And again for cred, we'll begin in Italy. Who needs a hall, a theatre, a lounge when you have convivial piazzas? City buildings should support and fringe public space, afford shelter and frameworks to enable activity that might cycle like the tide, day and night, responding to events and ad hoc pop-up opportunities. A bridge is shops, a piazza for filmmaking, by day a flower market, by night a party space.
We took this theory on board when designing the Adelaide Affordable Eco-Housing Project on the city's Whitmore Square back in 2004. This was a competition win that, in addition to arranging the site to enable good old solar passive design, sought to celebrate public space. Yes, there's an internal world where decked mews vent a basement car park and offer communal space for residents. But they also connect with a grand veranda that offers opportunity for street-side outdoor rooms, privately at upper levels and publicly on a street corner. The street corner has now become Cafe Troppo because no one else wanted to rent it. But Cafe Tea has seriously taken off and become a legend in its own lunchtime. Not to mention a great street corner music and tapas venue at night, and a kick-back all-day breakfast and sunbaking lounge on the weekends. 2011 saw a competition win to build the beginnings of a new town outside Darwin, at the estuary of the harbour's Elizabeth River. But the current NT government is stalling, though we did make the shortlist at the World Architecture Festival in order to keep the heat on them. Anyhow, we think of Waddell as an ephemeral village, and this the first village as a model for creating a string of similar size villages, all 600 metres wide, all walkable, all respecting the dynamic yet delicate hydrology that defines the landscape, all autonomous in their green servicing. This and subsequent villages will accommodate necessary community services and anchors of commercial and tourism activity, not to mention a pub with a view. In Village 1, just the mention of it makes me thirsty. Too many hooks in this talk. Anyway, in Village 1, we've reinvented a main street. It's a central snaking colonnaded pedestrian spine, a marketplace, and a means of visually connecting higher ground parkland with a wetland edge. It's also the way of underground water flow and a breeze path. It stitches codependent ecosystems. We envisage a grass fire running down it at festival time.
We're back to things built. These are a few small urban interventions, but ones that bring meaningful art and patterns and real shade to the Darwin City Mall. To create edges that might work as venues, extending rather average pre-existing verandas.
And this, as we name it, is Yili Rayung, gathering place in local Larrakia tongue. The site is Darwin's entertainment centre, which was developed in the 1980s with a postmodern applique by a Perth boy, come Singapore famous architect and 4 years back gold medalist. Anyway, here outdoor spaces were separated from passers-by by rather suburban planting, and dark glass disconnected the centre's internal spaces. In true 1980s style, its material quality was sadly paint. Well, we changed that by rediscovering the building's real and warm concrete bones. Then adding local Tiwi Island timbers, galvanised steel and screens of diverse texture. There's now a restaurant that opens to the street, shades on wires and a weird portal that reaches out to the city and beyond. A grand veranda, broad decks. One known as The Raft offers a venue for performance, exhibitions, markets and meeting.
Arnhem Land weavers were commissioned to create a centrepiece outdoor ceiling. The same techniques used to weave vines into baskets have been used here to weave recycled copper wire into a shimmering piece. Yili Rayung was opened in 2008 and has been and will continue to be used in ways which we haven't yet begun to imagine. To watch goings on in the ceiling weave, there are now 5 peewee bird nests. And last year, to honour Greg and Lena, through the Darwin City Council, we added beneath the weave a snake, Nalyod, the rainbow serpent.
The gesture is bespoke. Oh, jeez. It's okay, I've got my eye on the clock. The gesture is bestowed on them by the ceiling's original Maningrida weavers and is made by them with Joe Best, our Darwin director these days. To conclude, we offer you this poem. Nalyod, rainbow serpent, serpent spirit, generative yet consuming, power of creation and of destruction. You emerge, sun turns to cloud, to storm, then the careening flood that writhes, swathes, renews. You recede, scarring, marking, making this country. You dwell. We hear you in the tumble of the waterfall, feel you restless in river depths. You have to rise, to twist and arch skyward again, the great cycle, giving, taking. Aware of you, we stand here, surely honoured, knowing we are connected with the infinite. Thanks.
Thank you. Please.